because you're dumb to drink from a footprint. Why would you do that? People thought they were wolves or werewolves. And that is a mental disease. Not now. Right now, people can identify with cats, and it's okay. But in the 17th century, that was a mental disease. So, yeah, I guess we are growing. A month ago, I rewatched the entire series. And where's the final part? Welcome to another episode of my podcast, That's Fine With Me. Today, I'm going to be talking about werewolves, and it's spooky season. I know that I promised to share something about vampires, but I thought, why wouldn't I share something else? And yeah, that's how I came up with werewolves and legend stories, tales, whatever you want to call it. Let's get deeper, and let's start with wolves in general. Well, wolves, they were always among people. From ancient times, they were surrounded with wild animals and wild nature. That is the main reason why most of the time it was super scary, and people, they needed to get in a community to save and protect themselves. And they had some leaders they were the strongest one. They could provide the entire tribe with food, and they can procreate in the future. The best example is probably wolf example of pack. When they're strong males, they try to hunt, then they bring the prey, and they protect the entire pack. When wolves travel, it's very interesting because they get the leader, I guess, on the back and some strong males on the back to protect the pack from any unexpected changes and shifts while they're traveling, and they have someone else leading the way, and it's probably going to be someone strong as well. So they have both sides protected. And in the middle of it all, you can see small wolves, you could see female wolves, and that is the main reason why they were always protected. And that fascinated people, and they were scared of them, but they really loved the idea of wolves in general. And you could probably tell that a lot of leaders, I guess some leaders, because they were pagans, they wore skin, or at least the fur with skin of a wolf, and they thought that it's going to bring them strength and it's going to make them even stronger. This fascination with wolves was not only for them to see how to organize their tribe, but at the same time, there were some different stories, bedtime stories, to tell their kids. And most of the time, werewolves, they had 3 different divisions. The first one was the victim. Werewolves, they were sympathized because they were turned into wolves because of some love or compassion, and they were the victims of the spell and this curse. The second one, when you were damned, basically wolves were associated with murders, with rape. Most of the time they were associated with rape and cannibalism. And for centuries, if not for thousands of years, werewolves, they were males. Predominantly, they were males. Only, I guess, in the 20th century, when we had Hollywood step in the game, they were some female wolves, but most of the time they were male wolves. And of course, the third one is a warrior. It's pretty simple and it's easy to understand, because if people were inspired by wolves in their pack, they thought that wolves were warriors, and they tried to protect their pack. They tried to, provide some food and survive. So these are 3 divisions. And the first story that came to a public eye, I would say, it is about a Gal Gadot. That was a shepherd who fell in love with the goddess of love, and she turned him down because he was super, impressed with her beauty and the goddess herself. That is the main reason why she turned him into a wolf. Yeah, that was brutal. That is the main reason why we got the first story of a victim. And the second story came from ancient Greece, where there was a legend about the king Lacan. If I'm mistaken, I keep forgetting his name, guys. If I'm mistaken, it's Lacan. The king Lacan was preying from humans. He was actually cannibal, and when the god Jupiter, heard some rumors that there's a king who's eating humans, he got so furious that he tarnished his household and then turned him into a wolf, because that was dumb. He thought that Jupiter actually wanted to have some part of his praise or humans, and he tried to share this, I guess, act of love or whatever to Jupiter, and Jupiter was furious. That was the reason why he turned him into an animal, who he actually was. And I would say that this is a damned story of a person who was dumb enough to eat humans. And warriors, again, it's pretty much obvious. People lived with wolves, and they thought that these wolves were warriors. These were pagan stories. And not only these pagan stories, of ancient Greece and from any other cultures, but there were still so many more to add. And before Christianity, people were actually, toying with this idea that werewolves, they were pretty much real. And I would say, if you know anything about the Grimm brothers, they were going around specifically Germany and they were collecting different fairy tales and stories. And when I was at my university and we had a subject, it was like philosophy, we were talking about tales, and our teacher told us that all these tales right now that we have, and specifically cartoons or Disney, let's save the princess, it's complete bullshit. Unfortunately, back in the day, centuries and centuries ago, the Grimm brothers, they were not collecting these fairy tale stories. They were collecting some tales that were meaning to scare kids, not to entertain kids. These tales and these stories, they were some kind of lessons. If you misbehave, if you don't listen to your adults and you go to a forest, you're probably going to be killed. And they came up with so many different stories for kids to be scared of everything. That was the main idea of fairy tales. Not even fairy, I guess just tales. That is the main reason why I would say the stories that we see right now about the Red Hood girl, I feel like in a real, if I'm mistaken, it's actually from the Grimm brothers, and this was, very, very popular among kids, that the werewolf actually ate her grandma, and her grandma died. And if I'm mistaken, this Red Hood girl, she was eaten by a wolf as well. But I don't remember. I remember that I was reading some of these tales because I have the original tales of the Grimm brothers, but I don't remember most of it. Honestly, it was so many years ago. That is the main reason why I would say different regions of Europe and different countries, they had their own tales, such as Serbia legend that if you drink from a footprint of a werewolf or wolf specifically, then you're going to turn into a wolf. And that is so funny because I remember when I was a kid, I watched this cartoon that was really old, I guess 70s or 80s cartoon, where her name is Alyonushka and her little brother's name is Ivanushka. I'm from Russia, basically. So when Alyonushka was traveling with her brother, she said, please do not drink from a footprint. And he disobeyed. He drank from the footprint and he turned himself into a goat. That is a little bit different kind of story. He did not turn himself into a wolf, but the similarities, you can get them. And she saved him, she rescued him, but I guess in the Grimm brothers stories, he would still be a goat and someone will pray from him because you're dumb to drink from a footprint. Why would you do that? So yeah, that is the main reason why so many more stories were like Danish culture. They thought that only males could become werewolves. And if we're talking about Russia, a witch actually left her girdle. And if a witch left her girdle under a household during some wedding, every inhabitant from this village or city that crossed over her girdle would turn into a werewolf. That is something odd. I have never heard the story before. That was the main reason why I was like, what? So when all these pagan stories, they disappeared and faded away because of Christianity, a rise of Christianity, at first I would say, church did not focus on werewolves and didn't really care much. That was so many more other stories that I'm not going to tell you guys. If you're interested, you can read them yourself. But the idea of the scary werewolves reappeared only when the Black Death entered the game. Unfortunately, when plague started killing a lot of people, people were not only outnumbered by wild animals such as wolves, and a lot of wolves, they preyed on humans. The reason was that it had become another issue that too many wolves were kind of like creating a new danger. That was the main reason why people started killing them and creating this legend about very scary werewolves. They were cannibals, and they were preying on people. And another really important thing to mention, that while this period of time, ships, they were very, very important. The economy was based on ships, and their wool, they were, a source of meat. And that is the main reason why people really needed them in the civilization, let's say. But of course, wolves, they love ships. They love ships. And that is the main reason why they preyed on them. And people hated this. That is the main reason why they created more stories about how dreadful and bad wolves were. And then during the witch trials, which was specifically predominantly about women, because only women were considered most of the times witches. By the way, I have a podcast about plague. I have a podcast about witch hunt. So first, you can always check this out. But they did not actually associate males and some I guess, werewolves with witches, but sometimes there were occasions and there were situations when some men they were accused in being werewolves, and they were actually associated with demons and this pact with a demon. But I want to share some very, very scary story, and it was in 1589, similarly same time when Christianity was at a rise, similar time when the Black Death came into this whole arena. In Germany, Peter Stube, that was from Bedburg, he was accused in being a werewolf. And actually, he said that he was a werewolf, but right now we would probably call him a serial killer. He claimed that he turned into a wolf and then killed people because he needed to prey on them. And he had a pact with a demon or something like this. He was probably lying, or he had some mental disease. I'm pretty much sure. The story was crazy. It's brutal. He killed 14 kids. Among them, he killed his own son and he ate his brain. Then he actually committed incest with his own daughter and his sister. And I would say that it wasn't even that. He killed 2 pregnant women. He was found guilty, but he, I guess, didn't deny anything. And then, especially interested in his own daughter with a mistress, they were accused in helping him and they were burned alive. His fate was much more horrible. I mean, I will not ever protect a serial killer such as this, Peter, but, his death was more or less brutal. He was, they took his flesh off with some burning objects. They broke all of his limbs. They cut off his head, burned his body, and put his head on a spike and at a display, on a pole, a display to the entire, I guess, community. That is pretty brutal, I would say. But probably he deserved it. Not even probably, he deserved that. And in early 17th century, the new theory reappeared. I mean, the early and middle 17th century, when the colonization of the new land, specifically America, started, a lot of people, they came with their stereotypes, with their tales, and a lot of these people were coming from specifically Europe. And during this colonization, I'd say they were extremely brutal. The witch trials were crazy. They thought that it was a wild life, wild forest, and a lot of wild animals. That is the main reason why there were a lot of wolves. And they started killing so many wolves because they thought they were werewolves based on their tales and some stories from Europe, that it got to the point where it was massive and it was very ugly. And then only in, I guess, at the end of 17th century, people started making sense of science, and they were trying to get to the bottom what is actually happening. Are there real vampires? Are there real werewolves? Are there real creatures in the night? And of course, the new theory, I would say, came at a display. And I guess at the end of only 17th century, they found about leukemia. Leukemia was a thing. So leukemia is specifically a mental disease that people thought they were wolves or werewolves. And that is a mental disease. Not now. Right now, people can identify with cats, and it's okay. But in the 17th century, that was a mental disease. So yeah, I guess we are growing. Yeah, we know that it's not a disease. It's just you have to be identified as a werewolf. And then a little bit later, they found out about werewolf syndrome or Ambrose syndrome. This is a gene mutation that is causing some extra hair. So you can get hair whenever you just don't really get hair. If your hair is growing only in certain parts of your body. So with this gene mutation, it's basically everywhere. And that is the reason why people, they were kind of struggling because no one knew about the syndrome. And that was the reason why people, I guess, were accused of being werewolves. And only in the 20th century, people found out about porphyria, if I'm mistaken. I'm sorry, guys, because I tried to read these names. This is kind of infection, and sometimes it can be inherited. The main syndromes or symptoms, it's better to say, the main symptoms, it's rush, stomach ache, psychedelic hallucinations, dry mouth, some saliva, I guess, problems, and specifically if it's a severe case, people can bite other people. And sometimes actually porphyria can be found among animals and among people as well. It's kind of like brain swelling, and that is the main reason why the behavior is extremely weird. That is the main reason why, I guess, people were accused of being werewolves. Because, well, if someone bit me, I would definitely say, like, he's a werewolf. And I have nothing about signs, like, have no idea what signs is. I would definitely say, like, he's a werewolf, he bites. But it's interesting to mention, guys, at a rise of Hollywood, and specifically different literature, we started with, like, early ancient times with Gal Gadot, and then we moved through centuries. Hollywood was showing a little bit different story of werewolves, and I love it so much. Not like every part of it, but like Underworld, Twilight, everyone, like the Vampire Diaries, everyone has their own version of a werewolf, and it's drastically different from what people used to believe in. But the first, I guess, mention in cinemas of werewolves was in 1935. It was earlier, but some of these films, they were burned in fire, and they were lost basically in fire. That is the reason, like, the first, I guess, ever film that people could still have some evidence of this film from 1935, and it was called Werewolf of London. Unfortunately, this film caused xenophobia because the plot of this entire film that, if there is a werewolf and he bites you, then you're going to turn into a wolf as well, or werewolf. And they said that this disease that came from Tibet, and specifically it came from East, and xenophobia is the way when people are scared of something new, and they're scared of something that they are not familiar with. So when a lot of immigrants from East, they were coming to, or mostly it was Asian immigrants from East, so they were coming to Europe or United States, that was the reason why people were not trusting these people, though it's so weird that one film could create xenophobia of the entire nation. But it's whatever. And then in 1941, there was another film that was called The Wolf Man, and the author was Kurt, if I'm not mistaken, Siodmak. He was a Jewish author, and a lot of people are saying that the story was based on Nazi and how they treated Jewish people and community, and specifically David badges. It was a star shape that every Jewish prisoner, had to wear while the World War II. And when the author was creating the story in 1941, he was specifically showing this for the victims of a werewolf. So every victim of a werewolf had some kind of mark on their hand. And a lot of people are referring to this as the David badge. Okay, and now I want to talk about a little bit different, like modern, I guess, interpretation of werewolves. It was Underworld, one of my favorite. I rewatched the series not so long ago. I would say a month ago. I rewatched the entire series. And like, where's the final part? Okay, so where's the final part? I am still waiting. And I know there's not going to be the final film, but I'm still waiting. I don't know. And the Twilights, that is probably one of the first times when we saw like werewolves to be sexy. But it's interesting. The interpretation of 1935 showed us that werewolves, they can turn only on a full moon. They could be killed with a silver bullet, though they could be killed, I guess, during this urban legend that were centuries and thousands of years ago with, I guess, some wooden stake, or when the people had access to silver knives, they used silver knives. And of course, when people had access to arrows, they could use arrows, like silver arrows. But with bullets, it's so much easier. But Twilights, they went even further and they created this version of werewolves turning whatever they want. And with Twilights, it was an immediate transformation. They didn't really have to go through some pain, but it's actually very interesting. A lot of legends coming from ancient, I guess, legends, this transformation had to be painful because that was some sort of pact with a devil or something like this. And for the eternal life in this youth, you had to sacrifice at least something. Every transformation was painful, and this transformation did not give you any memory of what you were doing the night before or during the night. And you had to prey on people. That was just, when people are making the deals with devil, of course, they're going to be a catch. And in the case of werewolves, that was a catch. I can say that still I'm not really a huge fan of werewolves. I mean, I love wolves, but human being a wolf, it's just the same thing as Twilight. They probably smell really bad. They probably smell like dogs, and not like really nice dogs, but when it was rainy and it was like the dog after the rain. It was like my association. That is my reason. Probably I'm not really a huge fan of werewolves, but at least they're not cold as vampires, because we're going to be talking about vampires in my next podcast. And I really love the story about vampires. Actually, that was brilliant. Who would have thought? So please stay tuned if you're interested. And that is it for today. I don't really think we have to get deeper into this topic. I mean, you can, but I don't really find it interesting about modern society and modern films. I mean, most of the time. Oh, with Underworld, it's interesting. Like in Underworld, still predominantly there were males, and in most of the cases, these males they could turn any time of the day. But early on, I guess before the Underworld 2 or something like this, they were werewolves. They couldn't turn back to a human form. They were just wolves, but they were called werewolves. I don't know why. And then there was some mutation, and the first Lycan, or at least the first werewolf, was born that could change his form from human to wolf, from wolf to human. Okay, I'm gonna trust you on that. That's it. So let me know, what do you think about werewolves? Do you love werewolves? Or are you a huge fan of wolves, or maybe some other creatures such as vampires? And we're gonna talk about why we're probably a little bit more drawn to vampires than werewolves. Okay, I love you all so much, guys, and I'm gonna see you in my next podcast. That's fine with me. Till next time. Bye bye.